I want to start by thinking about what it is to be human. What actually makes us who we are? Is it our empathy, our self-awareness, consciousness? Or is it our own awareness of our mortality? I debated this with a friend recently who told me that even bonobo monkeys, forest birds and crows who've learnt how to use pelican crossings in Japan display curiosity too. Now, I want to think about who we are. And in arts and health, we frequently get our hooks into any useful tools that are out there. And the 5 Ways to Wellbeing by the New Economics Foundation has been a useful mantra over the last few years. And some of those points, these 5 ways that we're told we should be thinking about, are connect, be active, keep learning, give, and take notice. But I seem to have a recollection that when they first produced the 5 ways, take notice wasn't actually take notice, it was curiosity. Whatever happened to the curiosity? And very recently, I was reading about caves in France, in Rolfignac, in the Dordogne. These 13,000-year-old cave paintings that I'm sure we're all familiar with, where people are hunting bison and they're incredibly beautiful. But what's really impressive is at the back of the caves, high up on the ceiling, there are beautiful patterns and shapes painted onto the stone. And researchers have recently discovered that these 13,000-year-old finger paintings are in fact by 2- and 3-year-old children. And this is fantastic. We just have to imagine, these are by children sitting on the shoulders of their parents because they're too high up for the children to have reached 13,000 years ago. Does this tell us something about curiosity? Or does it tell us something about human beings' desire to create and our imagination? So for me, thinking about who we are, I'd say imagination is central to everything we do. And science and the art enable us to pursue the twin pillars of society. They enable us to pursue our understanding of the world and make sense of things. And science helps us understand how things work, the minutiae. But I'd argue, in an increasingly secular society, particularly, that the arts, creativity and culture and our imagination enable us to make sense of what it is to be human, and some of the bigger questions. So the 5 Ways to Wellbeing are incredibly useful, but I'd much rather think about my work, the arts for health work that I'm interested in, as being part of fundamental human rights. Isn't our practice wrapped up in dignity, equality, freedom, justice and peace? Might culture and the arts play a part in enabling these fundamental rights? I want to start by remembering a session that I was invited to facilitate in Falmouth 10 years ago, and I rolled along with a series of contemporary art images to work with what I thought were going to be carers of people with mental health problems. In fact, I'd got it horribly wrong, and it was a group of women who were caring exclusively for their partners or lovers who were near the end of their lives, and were in fact caring for people who had terminal illness. And I was really panicked because the first image I shared with this group of older women, exclusively women, was a picture of Tracy Emin's bed, her Turner Prize-losing bed, and I asked the question, is this good art? And it was like walking into the lion's den. I was humiliated. I was told it wasn't art, anybody could do it. But it provoked me to sort of work with these people in a different way. So we split up into groups of 2 and did some conscious stream of thinking about what our own beds meant to us. So one person would speak spontaneously, the other person would annotate it, and the poetry that these people created was absolutely profound about their own beds, the fact that most of them were in a separate beds to their partners, and the most profound thing was they started talking intimately about their sexual relationships and their lack of sexual relationships as their partners became increasingly ill. And this was incredibly powerful for me, as well as being humiliating, because I'd never talked about sexuality with older people before. So it was a deep learning curve. And at the end of the session, of course, I asked if Tracy Emin's bed was a great piece of modern art, and they all ridiculed me. But it encouraged me to think about issues that I'd never gone to before. This image of Julie Christie in the film Away From Her, directed by Sarah Polley, is really interesting because in it, Julie Christie plays a woman with dementia who embarks on an intimate relationship with another patient in a care home, and a husband who's had a string of affairs in his life has to cope with this. But it explores and begins to question these ideas about disinhibition that are so crucial in work around people with dementia. In reality, we know that anybody displaying sort of behaviour that's seen as disruptive or inappropriate would probably be prescribed antipsychotic medication, but it is in fact this disinhibition that's so intrinsically connected to imagination that's something in arts and health that we can work with, and that Jean Cohen and Anne Basting tell us that they're so intrinsically connected that organisations like the Museum of Modern Art and Palazzo Strozzi in Italy are actually harnessing the imagination of people with dementia. Some years ago I had the opportunity of working with Darren Browett, a three-dimensional MA design student at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he created these beautiful articulated seed pods that he wanted to experiment with and test with people experiencing memory loss. And at the same time I was working with people in a dementia assessment unit where we had the opportunity to explore and test some contemporary thinking in art and design. And these small-scale, intimate objects had a profound effect on one particular woman I worked with who, according to the clinicians, had lost all word finding and was a very, very depressed woman in the mid to late stages of dementia. Yet when we sat with her with this beautiful piece of crafted artwork, she found word finding and commented. She had expressions like, "Isn't this beautiful? It could be in a gallery. How much did it cost?" She was asking things that were totally relevant. And this just made me acutely aware how our work in intimacy, in those small scale settings, should be all about care, compassion and quality. And to me it illuminated the fact that here's a woman who we've been told she's like living her prognosis, but she's suddenly able, given that intimate interaction, to be able to expand and explore her thinking. And in the light of the Francis inquiry, it should be, all of us should be concerned with the quality of lived experience in our later life. A few years ago, and this is really sort of extending the idea about thinking on a small scale, I was asked to produce a strategy for arts and health for the Northwest region, and it was a great opportunity, but it was also the time that the recession was kicking in. We were about to have a new government, and we were in a global economic crisis. How relevant would a strategy have been in arts and health? Would it have just sat on a shelf mouldering? So, speaking with colleagues and artists and health practitioners around the Northwest region, we decided to work in small pockets to develop a manifesto for arts, health and wellbeing, very much in the traditional style of manifestos. And I want to just quote from a couple of manifestos that gave us some inspiration. Here's something from the first German Dada manifesto. Art, in its execution and direction, is dependent on the time in which it lives, and artists are creatures of their epoch. The best and most extraordinary artists will be those who every hour snatch the tatters of their bodies out of the frenzied cataract of life, who, with bleeding hands and hearts, hold fast to the intelligence of their time. So not exactly a strategic statement, but an impassioned artistic statement. And here's Walter Gropius in 1919, What is Architecture? Painters and sculptors become craftsmen again. Smash the frame of the salon art that's around your pictures. Go into the buildings, bless them with fairy tales of colour, chisel ideas into the bare walls, and build in imagination. And to begin working in small pockets, we really took on the mantra of Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So we wanted to create a manifesto that was about people and places. So in some small groups of 10 and 15, and other larger groups of over 100, we started to look at common ideas. And again, probably one of the most profound artist statements was a piece of poetry called The Manifesto for Tyneside upon England by Julia Darling. And I'm going to read it in full. Friends, I'm inventing a life in which your ingredients are returned to you. Our lives are run by car parks, carrier bags, suits and credit cards. So from this evening I'm removing power from our city leaders, and this city shall be run by its artisans and makers, by bread kneaders and stonemasons, sculptors and chocolate fanciers, by egg painters and flower arrangers, blacksmiths and conjurers. The old leaders shall go to the great hall where they shall be asked to cut up their suits and make them again. And I'm confiscating all luxury flats and offices and giving them rent-free to artists and makers. All property developers shall report to the great hall for retraining in creative play. All supermarkets will be barricaded, all chain stores closed. Phoenix Fine Food, the tobacco shop on Pink Lane, the delicatessen counter in Café Royal and Brighton Oriental stores, tailors on North Shields Fish Quay, the sweet shop off on Heaton Road, and other particular businesses will be allowed to flourish. Everybody should be taught the history of their street. Miro, the great Catalan artist, said that to be truly cosmopolitan we should begin by learning about our home. There shall be no brown signs, no information stands, no mobile phone centres, no mobile phones. We shall each learn a disappearing language. There shall be compulsory napping from 2 till 3 each day. Workforces must be provided with blankets and mattresses. Musicians from the hills shall play them to sleep. No one should own more than they can carry. We shall pull down Eldon Square and rebuild it as it was. I shall rebuild Handyside Arcade. We shall pull down Swan House Roundabout and make the Tyne Bridge pedestrian. Each of us will learn a contemporary dance. We shall not travel, although we may have pen pals and we are free to imagine travel. The air of the city shall smell of pies. There will be many bicycle repair shops and free bikes. The city shall be filled with the sounds of making, of sparking metal, of whirring mines, of fresh cheese and of new poetry. We shall all discuss small things. There shall be lesbian happy hour between 6 and 7. Schools will be small, doctors will be cheerful. Everybody shall make their own coffin and use it as a table. We shall be encouraged to grow English apples and raspberries. Plain English shall be used at all times. Porridge and soup will be plentiful. Visitors who come in droves must bring gifts to the great hall. Perhaps food, chocolate or wine would be appropriate. These gifts shall be shared equally. You can't enter the city without a gift. We shall know our saints. We shall know our devils. Friends, I'm inventing a life in which your ingredients are returned to you. Our lives are run by car parks, carrier bags, suits and credit cards. This is my homage to you. Now that beautiful piece of poetry by Julia Darling just reminds me of what Mike White often quotes as our small-scale global phenomenon. You know, we may be working in small groups, but we're active and we're out there thinking and articulating what it is we do. So the manifesto, it started with some very basic premises. Art, is it just the icing on the cake? Health? Well, it's just not being sick. Are we offering a prescription for the maladies of our society? Is that what we're suggesting? Are we offering a cure-all? This is not a quick fix. It's not about benign lumps of municipal sculpture. This is not about reducing the arts to a cost-effective prescription. This is about well-being. It's about democracy. It's about human flourishing. And it's about new ways of understanding impact and value. This is about solidarity. So the manifesto can be found on the Arts for Health website and the Arts for Health blog. But for us, it really just brought people together and actually influenced the National Charter for Arts, Health and Wellbeing that the National Alliance for Arts, Health and Wellbeing have produced in a very similar way, working with groups of people around the country. And there is a groundswell of activity now and political advocacy, not least from Lord Howarth of Newport and the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Arts, Health and Wellbeing, Sarah Newton. There are debates across the globe, there are networks in Australia, in Lithuania, in Finland, and across Latin America. But we are still unequal consumers, and how do we get rid of the stranglehold of consumerism, this air-conditioned nightmare? Well, like I said, Mike White puts it, we are a small-scale global phenomenon. And so much so that the latest incarnation of the manifesto is one being developed with people in recovery from alcohol and other substance addiction. And we're calling it a recoverist manifesto. Why recoverist? Because people trapped by addiction are fighting to recover, and they don't want to be passive medicated individuals pathologised by a system, the people who are questioning who the dealers are. Are they the shady characters on the street corner, or the manufacturers of cheap booze and prescription drugs who dutifully pay their taxes? And like the inspirational Nelson Mandela, he was once vilified by politicians and the press alike for being a terrorist, and then, miraculously was turned into a messiah kind of figure. So people in active recovery really want to harness something of what it is to be themselves again and have a voice. And this is the key thing about the work around manifestos, it's giving people a voice. For me, thinking about craft particularly, and its power to articulate and generate conversation, has been monumentally described by Grayson Perry. And a few weeks ago, his 6 tapestries, The Vanity of Small Differences, finished its exhibition here in Manchester. And I went to see it a number of times. And every single time I went to this exhibition, it was full of people. Sharing stories, having conversations, older people, younger people, everybody you could see. The galleries were bursting with life. People were contemplating and questioning this kind of rake's progress and discussing our consumer addiction. But the key thing was, they were all transfixed in stitch. And the power of craft to give voice is probably best illustrated by A.S. Byatt, who reminds us of the legend of Penelope, the long-suffering wife of King Odysseus, who goes off to war for 25 years, and she spends these 25 years busily fending off men who pursue her by saying she'll only consider their advances after she's finished weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law. Every day she creates this burial shroud, weaving it, and every evening she unpicks it, so as to not succumb to their advances. Now, Byatt again reminds me of the Greek legend of Philomena. After being raped by her brother-in-law and having her tongue removed, she weaves the crime into the very fabric of her robes to reveal the story to her sister. So in this pre-literate society, she tells a story, she has voice, and the rapist is subsequently punished. These are powerful, powerful stories. And Byatt describes this. She says, we think of our lives and of stories as spun threads, extended and knitted or interwoven with others into the very fabric of communities or histories or texts. The Brazilian Arthur Bispo do Rosario spent most of his life in a mental hospital in Brazil, apparently segregated and detained against his own will. But he spent his own life weaving things and creating and embroidering, and this is his robe, his presentation cape. And Louise Bourgeois said that this crafting, this creating, represented his fear of losing contact with the world. And she wrote, like Penelope and the spider, he spent his whole life doing and undoing. He was seeking order to the chaos, a structure and rhythm to time and thought. This is powerful stuff. And now pieces of work like this created by people like do Rosario are sort of segregated in their own terms now as outsider art, whatever that is. But it enabled this man to impose order on the chaos of his existence, and is really powerful. And the artist Alice Kettle is a textile artist who finds promise and possibility in a line and a thread. And Alice's work, which takes months to complete, allows her to let her imagination wander and to explore all the vivid pictures and impressions that come to her and become material once a work is finished. She describes the creation of her work as trying to find herself through stitching herself back together, almost the repairing of self. Alice Kettle helped me understand the potency of craft to give a voice more nuanced and more powerful than newspapers, TVs, and our fast food consumer culture. I love it that this event is called Beyond the Toolkit. And for some time I've been working in arts and health, which has a history of starting in hospitals and humanising health environments. I've resisted the arguments that chief executives of NHS trusts wrote me that this is a hospital, it's not an art gallery. Well, to hell with that, actually. Hospitals and care homes are more often than not populated by people who are the most marginalised, who have the lowest life expectancy and are the most unequal people, marginalised by poverty, lack of education, lack of aspiration. And perhaps these care environments might be the first opportunity for people actually to engage with culture and the arts. So let's think of ways we can, make these places far more creative and beautiful and give people access to culture and the art. And as the latest attempt at frameworks for research in arts and health dictate that our practice should be clinically measurable and understood in terms of science, it misses the point. The arts and crafts are what actually make us who we are and enable us to make sense of the conditions of our lives. Just think of those children 13,000 years ago sitting on their parents' shoulders in a cave in France, creating from their imagination paintings into the ceiling. It's essential. It's who we are. And the gibbering, small-minded, bean-counting idiots, journalists and critics alike, reduce our field to blunt economics, or as Thomas Carlyle put it, the dismal science. Quantum physicists are keen and confident to explore hypotheses that are beyond my wildest dreams. So why aren't artists and craftspeople more confident in saying, this is my hypothesis, prove me wrong? Losing sight of our own unique power, we constantly batter ourselves for the gold standard research and forget what it is in fact that artists, designers, architects and craftspeople are doing. We're researching, we're investigating, and we're exploring, and let's do it in our own right. And there is a word of caution to be had about mainstreaming our work, because there is a danger it'll become bland, middle ground, some kind of panacea for all life's ills, which is not. We're the researchers and pioneers of a new era of exploration, navigating new ways of understanding, of doing, and of being. It's our imagination that's our unique power. It allows us to be free, even in the face of adversity. Let's be brave. Let's be provocative and challenge ignorance and prejudice, and let our imaginations be unrestrained.